Have you ever loved a woman so perfect that she seemed impossible to exist, and yet something about her always seemed wrong? Something that drove you crazy, that confused you, that turned love into chaos. In this video, we will reveal the dark and almost secret side of extreme beauty. Understand why irresistibly attractive women can become emotionally dangerous, and why no one ever told you the truth about it. Stay with me, because what you are about to discover will change the way you see love and attraction itself. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. Everything begins with a gaze. Not hers, but that of others. From an early age, some girls experience something that most will never understand: the exaggerated attention that their beauty awakens. She enters a common environment, a school, a bus, a supermarket, and suddenly she's no longer seen as an ordinary child. The gazes that were once neutral now devour every movement, every gesture, every smile. And she, at 13 or 14 years old, still trying to understand who she is, feels a mixture of fascination and fear in the face of this unexpected attention. Beauty appears before maturity, and the world reacts to her as if she were a goddess, without anyone realizing the psychological weight this carries. This early attention acts as a silent blow to the psyche. She has not yet developed the internal mechanisms to deal with desire, envy, and expectation, but the world already demands an adult presence from her. Every compliment is a reinforcement that mixes pleasure and confusion, and every gaze loaded with desire transforms her identity into something she never asked to be. At the same time she learns that the world bows before her appearance, she also learns that her voice, her truth, and her boundaries have no real value. The world teaches that her beauty is her power, but no one teaches the emotional price of carrying that power so early. The cruelest effect of this interrupted childhood is the distortion of self-perception. She begins to believe that her appearance defines who she is and how she should behave. Constant validation becomes the standard for any action, while criticism, constructive truth, disappears completely. She learns that any attempt to face her mistakes or flaws is received as insolence, envy, or ingratitude. And so, without realizing it, the seed of illusion and emotional fragility is planted. The child still living inside her begins to get lost amid the social fear that surrounded her, confusing false applause with real love. The environment around her becomes a distorted mirror of reality, where all gazes and gestures reinforce an unreal world. Men, classmates, even friends and family start reacting not to the girl, but to what she represents: an ideal of perfection, desire, and status. This external projection becomes an invisible prison, shaping her expectations, her choices, and her ability to trust others. She learns early that her presence has an effect, but never understands that the world around her is more interested in what she symbolizes than in the actual person she is. Finally, what begins as a premature flourishing transforms into fertile ground for loneliness and emotional confusion. She grows surrounded by admiration, but without true love. Surrounded by applause, but without confrontation. Surrounded by praise, but without guidance. The child within her remains vulnerable, frightened, and craving a truth she never received. And at this point, beauty begins to stop being just a gift and becomes a prison. A silent trap that will shape her relationships, her self-esteem, and inevitably, her emotional sanity. As the girl grows, the attention that was once curiosity transforms into adoration. She becomes a goddess in a world of mortals, surrounded by people who do not dare to confront her, but who are always waiting, seeking something in return: approval, validation, desire. Every compliment, every gesture of reverence builds an invisible wall around her self-perception. The danger is not in admiration itself, but in the absence of criticism and truth. Without someone to challenge her, to teach her to deal with limits, or to face her flaws, she begins to believe that her presence and beauty are synonymous with absolute power, and that the world must bow before her. The world around her functions like an emotional echo chamber. Everything she does is amplified and interpreted through the prism of beauty. A smile is adored, a gesture is studied, a mistake is forgiven without question. Over time, she learns that any slip or honesty that is not molded to please will be rejected, interpreted as ingratitude, envy, or insolence. And so, she internalizes a cruel lesson. To be accepted, loved, or admired, she must maintain a perfect image, avoiding vulnerability and any confrontation that reveals imperfections. This situation creates what we can call a prisoner of her own reflection. Surrounded by priests of adulation, men and women who pay her reverence but never offer truth, she finds herself incapable of developing self-perception or self-assessment. Each person around her becomes a mirror, but a mirror that only reflects the perfection she must sustain, never the reality of who she truly is. Thus, she grows without experiencing love that confronts and heals, learning that superficial applause is more valuable than deep honesty. The psychological effect of this constant adulation is devastating. The girl, now a young woman, begins to distrust the truth, interpreting any confrontation or criticism as a personal attack. She learns to hide real emotions, to mask doubts, and to protect her image at any cost. The fear of losing the status of perfect creates a pattern of defensive behavior, irony, sarcasm, emotional manipulation, and evasion. And the most subtle yet cruel aspect is that she does not realize that this protective armor keeps her isolated, unable to relate genuinely to the world around her. In the end, beauty, which should have been just a gift, becomes an emotional prison. She learned to be adored but not loved, revered but not understood, desired but not authentic. Her relationships become a stage where everyone plays carefully rehearsed roles so as not to threaten her goddess status. And when attention and validation inevitably diminish, when perfection begins to fade, emotional collapse approaches, not as a sudden crash, but as a slow crumbling of everything she never had the courage to confront within herself. As the young woman enters the adult world, the reflection she receives continues to distort reality. Everything people show her is a mirror of their own expectations and desires, not a representation of who she truly is. Men and women around her become pieces in a carefully staged theater, always ready to reinforce the perfection she believes she possesses. Any attempt to confront her with the truth is received as aggression or rejection, while the continuous applause becomes an emotional drug, addictive, seductive, and dangerously deceptive. The subtlest effect of this distorted mirror is that she begins to internalize the illusion as reality. Every compliment, every reverent gaze, every gesture of desire reinforces the narrative that beauty is enough. She learns that vulnerability, humility, and self-criticism are unwelcome, that the world values image, not essence. Thus, she becomes a master at maintaining a flawless facade, but at a very high psychological cost. Disconnection from herself and the inability to form truly deep and authentic relationships. Romantic relationships become the cruelest reflection of this distortion. She attracts men who say what she wants to hear, who fall in love with the image and not the person. When they realize that perfection does not guarantee balance or submission, they disappear. She becomes confused, thinking them ungrateful, cold, and cowardly, without realizing they are just mirrors of the world she herself built. A world where truth is not allowed in, and where perfection is always valued more than sincerity or authenticity. The consequence of this environment is the emergence of defensive and self-destructive behaviors. She learns to ionize, attack, and deflect any criticism, creating barriers that emotionally isolate her. The arrogance that many perceive as a personality trait is, in reality, armor built to survive in a world that never told her the truth. Every word or gesture that could bring her closer to real love is reinterpreted as a threat, and every attempt at vulnerability is suffocated by years of social reinforcement that prioritized her appearance over her humanity. In the end, the distorted mirror not only alters the perception others have of her, but also the one she has of herself. She believes she is in control, awake, and conscious, but in truth, she is trapped in a theater of illusions, surrounded by false applause and scripts written by those who want to maintain her adoration. The world treats her as a goddess, but inside, truth, self-perception, and genuine love are absent. At this point, beauty stops being just a gift and becomes an invisible prison, whose bars are made of compliments, gazes, and unrealistic expectations. The collapse does not happen suddenly. It is a silent erosion, beginning in relationships where unrealistic expectations from both sides clash with invisible truth. Men approach, fall in love with the image she projects, and then withdraw when they realize that behind the beauty there is fragility, confusion, and a constant need for validation. Each breakup becomes more painful, not only because of abandonment, but because it reveals a flaw she never learned to confront: the lack of self-perception. What seemed like charm and power slowly turns into isolation and frustration. Friendships are not exempt from this dynamic. Friends who try to offer honesty, guidance, or constructive criticism are often interpreted as envious or ill-intentioned. Over time, she learns to deflect, ironize, and attack before anyone has the chance to confront her with reality. This defense mechanism, so necessary for her early emotional survival, becomes a prison. She keeps people at a distance, not out of disdain, but out of fear that any closeness will reveal the emptiness that has accumulated inside her. The identity, which should be the core of her strength, begins to fragment. She no longer knows how to differentiate what is hers from what is a reflection of the world around her. Her thoughts, desires, and behaviors are shaped by others' expectations. Every compliment reinforces an artificial version of herself, while every criticism is perceived as an attack. Authenticity disappears, and in its place emerges a carefully constructed persona, which appears strong and confident, but is in fact desperately vulnerable. This hidden vulnerability creates constant internal tension. She desires true love, but does not recognize those willing to offer it. She seeks connection, but any attempt at intimacy is sabotaged by fear that her flaw will be exposed. Beauty, which was once a gift, now acts as a lens that distorts reality, separating her from genuine experiences and isolating her in a world of carefully maintained appearances. The psychological impact of this slow collapse is profound. She begins to feel an emptiness that nothing can fill. Reading, traveling, professional achievements, and social validation become temporary palliatives, incapable of reaching the core of the frustration that grows silently. Every effort to feel whole or complete hits the same invisible wall because truth was never allowed in. She learned early that questioning or confronting her mistakes was dangerous, and this lesson follows her into adulthood, creating an endless cycle of emotional self-sabotage. Her love life often becomes a symbolic battlefield. Men attracted to her beauty try to win her over, but end up reflecting back the inconsistencies and emotional disorder she herself cultivated. She feels anger, injustice, and disappointment, but does not realize that these experiences are mirrors of the theater she allowed to form. Each failure in relationships reinforces the illusion that others are at fault, when in reality, the collapse began years earlier, in the silence of the world that idolized her and never told her the truth. Over time, the woman finds herself trapped in a cycle of unrealistic expectations and emotional isolation. Recognition and adulation that once fed her self-esteem now imprison her. She learned to depend on the approval of others, and when that approval diminishes, the emotional abyss is revealed. The beauty that should have opened doors now creates walls, and life becomes a theater where all applause is false, and no one dares to offer the honesty that could save her sanity. In the end, the slow collapse is, paradoxically, both consequence and warning. It is the price of a life lived without truth, of an interrupted childhood, and of constant, limitless adoration. Every broken relationship, every lost friendship, every moment of emotional frustration reflects the invisible prison built by her own beauty. And when, finally, the silence of truth is heard, she realizes that she was awake only on the world's stage, but never truly awake to life, to herself, or to genuine love. Truth, though often painful, is the only way out for those trapped by their own reflection. Women who grew up idolized, without hearing no or facing their flaws, can only begin to free themselves when someone or something is willing to confront their illusions. This confrontation is not an attack, it is care. It is love that challenges, love that corrects, love that teaches that perfection is not synonymous with control or happiness. Only by hearing the truth is it possible to recognize the patterns that shaped their life and begin the emotional reconstruction that years of adulation prevented. The healing process begins with self-perception. She must recognize that many of the problems she faces are not the fault of others, but reflections of the world she herself unconsciously helped to build. Every failed relationship, every lost friendship, every moment of emotional frustration is an opportunity to look inward and understand. What hurts me is not the other. It is the distortion created by my inability to face reality. Only by accepting this fact is it possible to break the cycle of self-sabotage that follows so many attractive women since adolescence. Understanding that beauty is not absolute power is an essential step. When external adulation and validation no longer dictate her emotions, she begins to realize that true value lies in authenticity. Beauty, which once functioned as an invisible prison, can become an ally, no longer to manipulate the world, but to express who she really is. This awakening requires courage, because it means facing years of illusions, detaching from unrealistic expectations, and accepting that perfection was never necessary to be loved or respected. Another essential aspect of healing is the ability to listen to others. True love is not blind, does not bow to image, and does not ignore mistakes or flaws. It confronts, teaches, and guides. Women who learn to live isolated in their own internal theaters need to rediscover trust in human relationships, allowing others to tell them the truth without fear of rejection or punishment. This learning is slow, painful, and often frustrating, but it is the key to rebuilding genuine relationships and finding emotional balance. Healing also requires radical self-acceptance. Recognizing one's own vulnerability is not weakness. It is liberation. Every flaw, every insecurity, and every past trauma must be faced and integrated into identity. Unlike her previous life, where any flaw was masked or denied, she can now look at herself with honesty and compassion. This is the process that transforms fear into strength and confusion into clarity, allowing the woman to learn to love without depending on applause, praise, or external approval. The impact of this truth on her love life is profound. Relationships cease to be theater and become genuine connections based on shared vulnerability and mutual respect. Men and women around her cease to be mirrors of someone else's desire and become conscious partners in the emotional journey. External beauty remains present, but loses its central role. Now, inner strength, emotional clarity, and maturity truly define the person. At this moment, illusion finally dissolves, and life begins to be lived with awareness and freedom. Patience is essential on the path to healing. The mind and heart carry years of conditioning, reinforcement of illusions, and defensive behaviors. Every step, every acknowledgement of error, every act of vulnerability requires effort and courage. But by persisting, she discovers that truth, though hard, is transformative. What once imprisoned her now becomes an opportunity for growth, self-knowledge, and building healthy and deep relationships. Finally, Truth is Healing is also a warning and an invitation. A warning to all of us. Idolizing beauty without the courage to confront truth creates invisible prisons. And an invitation to practice confronting love, teaching courage, and liberating honesty. Only when truth is heard and incorporated does the madness cultivated by adulation yield space to wisdom, maturity, and genuine love. And it is in this space that beauty ceases to be a curse and finally becomes an expression of the most authentic within us. In the end, understanding the relationship between beauty, power, and illusion is not about judgment, but about learning to see the truth in oneself and in others. If you want to continue exploring the secrets of the human mind, understand what drives behavior, and discover how not to get lost in emotional illusions, subscribe to the channel now and activate notifications so you do not miss the next videos revealing the hidden side of desire, attraction, and psychological power. These 2 videos in front of you are not here by accident. And what if everything you believe about yourself is only a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos on the side and begin to break this mirror. You will have to take the risk of clicking. So, which one will you choose?